Welcome everyone to a celebration of the launch of my great friend's book, Clay Jenkinson's new book, The Language of Cottonwoods, Essays on North Dakota. Tonight, after a brief introduction, Clay will read for us from the book, and then we'll have time for a discussion and questions, some that I have prepared, and hopefully many of you will ask questions as well who are watching this evening. My name is Michael Khandelwal, and I'm the Executive Director of the Muse Writers Center in Norfolk, Virginia. The Muse is one of the largest literary centers in the country. We offer online and in-person creative writing classes in all genres for all levels and ages. Our summer classes are mostly online, so anyone, anywhere can take a class. We have classes for all kinds of writers, new, emerging, professional writers, and all the genres, fiction, nonfiction, memoir, poetry, screenwriting, songwriting, comic book writing, and more. And we also have a thriving program for kids and teens. And also, we're the only center in the nation to freely offer tuition help to anyone who needs it. So if you can't afford a class, we will not turn you away, and we never will. Last year, we gave away more than $25,000 in tuition help because we don't want anything getting in the way of someone who wants to learn to write creatively or find a community. We also offer hundreds of free literary events a year, like this one that you're a part of right now. And we're also starting to get back to in-person events as well. Plus, we have a well-established outreach program working with at-risk and or gifted youth, seniors living in memory care and assisted living, and also with veterans and the military population. You can learn more about our classes, events, and other programs on our website, the-muse.org, the-muse.org. So a quick note before I introduce Clay. If you are in the webinar with us, you can type your questions in the Q&A. It's a little button on the bottom. And if you are watching on the Facebook live stream, we'll have someone checking the comments there as well for your questions. So let me now introduce you to my very dear friend, Clay Jenkinson. I would imagine that if you are here, you already know that Clay is one of our nation's leading humanities scholars, as well as interpreters of Thomas Jefferson and so many other important figures in our history, including Theodore Roosevelt and Meriwether Lewis, both of whom figure prominently in the history of North Dakota. You also know that he is the host of public radio's The Thomas Jefferson Hour and speaks both in character and as himself all across the nation. You may or may not know that Clay is also one of the kindest people I know. He is a great teacher, both in the academy and also as a teacher of writing. But really, he is, to me, an example of someone who takes his time here on earth very seriously and with passion and warmth and a big spirit of fun. So thank you, Clay, for being here tonight. We are all eager to hear you read now from your new book about your home state of North Dakota. So Clay, take it away and read for us, please.
Michael, and all of you, thank you. What a beautiful and generous introduction. I remember when I met you, and it must be well more than a decade ago in Norfolk, and you wanted to interview me for a weekly magazine or newspaper there, a tabloid of some sort. And we met, and I think you asked me all sorts of questions I don't think I've ever been asked before. And I think you got me to say that I wanted to die by being struck by lightning and eaten by a mountain lion or something.
I think it was coyotes, you said.
Yeah, so that's come back to haunt me from time to time. This book ends with that, as you know. So the end of the book is called The Language of Cottonwoods, Essays on the Future of North Dakota. And it's not really about North Dakota. It's about the Great Plains. It's about rural life. It's about America. But I love North Dakota with all my heart. I'm speaking to you today from Bismarck, the state capital, the only state whose capital is named after a German dictator. And behind me, just for those who are thinking, who want to write, this is my 14th book. I write incessantly now. I've become a writer. For a long time, I was embarrassed to call myself a writer. I felt, that's, what are you, Hemingway? Are you Steinbeck? So I wouldn't say that. I'm a scholar, but now I believe I am a writer, and the pandemic has helped, actually. But if you see the books behind me, there are several complete editions of the works of Charles Dickens. This is my Dickens library. Then I have some Atomic West and J. Robert Oppenheimer books here. But the best way to be a writer is to read, and find the authors that you love, and read them. And you don't imitate them. You just absorb something about the process by seeing. You don't have to parse the sentences. You don't have to diagram them. You don't have to type them out. Although all those things are interesting, just have to just let it absorb prose. So Anyway, I'm thrilled to be here, and I love what the Muse does, and I love you, as you know, and so I'm thrilled that you've asked me to do this. I don't like. So here's the book, and by the way, what a cover! This is a cover produced by my friend Katrina Case, who lives here in North Dakota. She's an artist. She moved here 5 or 6 years ago. I actually just met her on an airplane. I travel all the time. I was coming back from Chicago, and we sat aisle to aisle and struck up a conversation. And then when it turned out that she was an artist, I said, would you be willing to paint some paintings for some of my lectures and so on? And she said she would. So she painted. This is the Little Missouri River with the Badlands behind it. And I said I wanted a thunderstorm, which she gave me. I wanted some fall cottonwood trees because that's what the book ends with and its title. And then I said, I also want an oil well, because I don't want to present this as paradise. I want to present this as paradise with some intrusion, and economic development is extremely important. So she did, and it's spectacular. And I just love the book. The old cliche, you can't tell a book by its cover. You really can with this book. When you pick this up, this is going to be a book about backcountry, about Badlands country. So I don't really like reading, because it always seems like, I shall now read the first chapter of my most recent book. We've all been to that reading. So I'm going to read just a couple of passages, of very different sorts, and then I just want to have a conversation with you and with anyone who might be interested. But thank you. So this is a chapter on the Little Missouri River, which is the river on the cover. It's sort of, for me, my sacred river, my home place. And so the book is largely analytical. It's essays. It's third person. I'm really wrestling with certain problems of identity and character and the post-Jeffersonian and the plight of rural America. But I also at times wanted to bring you, Michael, into the book. I wanted you to feel that you're in the book. I wanted you to smell the dust. I wanted you to feel the river. I wanted you to hear the breeze in the cottonwoods. So this passage is my introduction to the chapter saying we must protect, if nothing else, the corridor of the Little Missouri River Valley. And so I'm trying to get you in it so that your soul is open to the argument. And so here's how it starts. I'm camped along the edge of the Little Missouri River north of the village of Marmarth in a lean cluster of cottonwood trees. The temperature is about 68 degrees, subsiding about 2 degrees per hour. It will not freeze tonight, but as Hamlet says, it will be a nipping and an eager air come midnight, when I venture out on tender, pampered, white feet and wince-footed, just far enough from my tent for respectability's sake to pee. The cottonwoods are thin and wispy here, with some bare and shattered limbs and a few fallen branches to serve as camp pews. I'm maybe 30 feet from the riverbank, but the Little Missouri itself is a dozen yards farther away. The river is low. I walked across it 3 times in the last 2 hours. The highest it got was just below my knees. If I had the car keys and a cell phone in my pants pocket, I would not have gotten them wet. I'm the only person here, the only person for miles in any direction. My modest blue and white REI tent is set up facing west in the hope of a thunderstorm. I can see a few white-faced Herefords off in the distance. Occasionally one of them bawls for no apparent reason. I am waiting for the first yip and croon of the coyotes. The sun is going to set within the next half hour. The sky is mostly cloudless, serenely autumnal, and the river is a magical reflected blue against the tawny and russet grasses and the golden yellow of the cottonwood leaves in this little corner of the Great Plains. Down on the western horizon, there are some charcoal gray clouds. That should enhance the sunset. The cottonwood leaves are not yet at their maximum beauty, but that day will come within the next week. At that point, if you catch it, the Little Missouri River Valley is as beautiful a place as exists on earth, a lazy, pointless western river threading its way around graceful S-curves and cutting the Badlands steadily badder. I'm boiling water, not from the Little Missouri, on a marvelously efficient little stove no bigger than a grapefruit. My freeze-dried dinner tonight will be kung pao chicken. These camp meals have come a long way in the last 30 years. Some of them are positively delicious. If my calculations are correct, the moon will rise about 9:30 p.m., more full than not. There's nothing I am afraid of here but man. It is exceedingly unlikely that anyone would spot me here or know I have set up camp in this little copse on a grass bench of a remote river that is mostly just left alone. I am happy. And so that's the start of that chapter. And I hope, Michael, that you feel drawn in, that you feel you might be at that camp with me, and that you realize there must be something pretty special about this place with that very basic introduction. There's nothing fancy in the writing here. It's just as straight as I can make it.
It's beautiful. I mean, you set the scene so beautifully, Clay.
I so appreciate that. That's my goal. And then at the end, so then all sorts of things happen in this chapter, and I make this argument that we should protect this, and that is everything fungible? Is everything instrumental? Do we have to extract? Is extraction the human condition? Can't we agree to set a few things aside? Of course, I'm taking a lot of inspiration here from my heroes, Thoreau. Walden, I think, is America's greatest book, and from Theodore Roosevelt, who created, in many respects, the conservation ethos of the American West. He set aside 230 million acres of the public domain as national park, national forest, national wildlife refuge, national monument, national game preserve, and so on. So that's that. And then at the end of the chapter, I finish the meal. I say, well, it wasn't really great kung pao chicken. And then I slip off to bed and listening to the coyotes. This next piece is very different. This is sort of Whitman-esque, if I may use that term. I wrote a chapter on the Bakken oil boom. You all probably know that we had a huge oil boom in North Dakota between 2004 and 2015. And it was like the California gold rush. 30,000 young men came from all over, and it was chaos. North Dakota only has a population of 750,000. And we just weren't ready for this tsunami of human activity. And of course, if you put 30,000 young men in one place, that's a lot of testosterone. And that testosterone is going to find ways to express itself. And I actually had a chance to interview Michael Patrick Smith, who's written a book on this called The Good Hand. And he came out from New York and spent 9 months here. And when he read this, I sent him this after we had our interview, and he said, that's the best description I've ever read of an oil boom. So I hope people feel that. And on the whole, I say the oil boom was good. That good and bad, but mostly good. The Bakken oil boom was so many things: an overnight invasion of mostly young men from all over the country, from all over the world, by bus, by automobile, by train, by pickup truck, by commercial air flight. An invasion of heavy metal, pipe sections of every size piled up everywhere like elongated pyramids, containers, fracking rigs, water trucks, bulldozers, cranes, giant wrenches, winches, service vehicles, field welding units, wreckers, gravel trucks. Dust and grime, burrito vans and coffee shacks, gorgeous hookers flying in commercial from Vegas and LA, the most beautiful women the rest of the passengers had ever seen. Everything being paved at once everywhere, with tens of thousands of orange cones lined up along the highways, many of them smashed and scattered by indifferent truckers. Hours-long lines at McDonald's, Dairy Queen, Taco Bell, Taco John's, Arby's, Applebee's. Spills, little spills, big spills, secret spills, covered up spills, oil spills, saltwater spills, oil slurry spills, fracking fluid spills, urine spills. Nothing more, said a pro-oil North Dakota talk show host, than a little drip of errant toothpaste before you get the cap on right. Wall-to-wall hard drinking in the roadhouses. 250 lit men and just 15 women. Fist fights in the parking lots, wrench fights, gang fights, love triangles. Jealous boyfriends knifing their women. In the emergency rooms, women beaten nearly to death. A man holding 4 fingers in a napkin, hoping they can be reattached. Burn victims, eyes blinded by chemicals. A convenience store that went from 3 million in sales one year to 35 million the next. 4 men sleeping in a Coleman pop-up camper at 25 below zero. Walmart giving up shelving its goods and merely leaving the merchandise pallets open on the floor. Shysters, dreamers, misfits, felons, fugitives, con men, defrocked priests, mountebanks, disbarred lawyers, Texas landmen, waitresses turned hookers, hookers turned waitresses, Nigerians, tarot readers, Asian massage therapists, 19-year-old reporters on their first job, the steady stream of national media helicoptering in for 2 days to get the whole story, Stern lectures by hometown parents terrified for the safety of their teenage children, especially their daughters. Swaggering state politicians, anxious local ones, the coffee clutches of retired men displaced from their accustomed meeting places, jails at capacity with drunk and disorderly, widows who plan their errands so that they never have to try to make a left turn, the blue glow of 1,000 LCD widescreen televisions in the man camps, billboards stacked up like dominoes along the roads offering good jobs with benefits and a pickup, armies of consultants, 4-hour traffic jams on US 85 between Alexander and Williston, 2-liter bottles of urine 10 to a mile tossed into the ditches, strippers working poles on excursion buses, drugs being handed out like chewing gum on street corners, drugs to stay awake, drugs to sleep, drugs to get high, drugs to numb the pain of the body, drugs to numb the pain of existence, drugs to get it up, drugs to see God, alcohol in oceans, the bang of shot glasses on tables of bars and restaurants, boisterous laughter, harassment of the female servers, 15-year-old waitresses grabbed by their bottoms and their breasts, car dealerships with 200 gleaming white new Ford pickups in a line along the road, big trucks violating traffic laws, let everyone else beware, every 10th vehicle with a broken windshield, oversized loads everywhere, frightened highway patrolmen walking cautiously up to a jacked up pickup with smoked windows on a remote stretch of highway, vehicles in ditches everywhere, gleaming man camps, modest man camps, chaotic man camps, camps of old RVs, trailers, mail trucks, panel trucks, VWs, rebel flags, 100 trucks lined up at a saltwater storage dump, the drivers standing in small clusters for the 7-hour wait. Music's from pickups at maximum decibel, the bass throbbing the street itself. Money changing hands in every direction, giant tips for pretty servers, giant tips for pliable strippers, money thrown across the bar because there is no time to wait for change. Priests turned social workers, porn everywhere, broken down men and women at AA meetings, broken men in the back rows of Sunday church services, men calling home to Louisiana in the halls of motels and pleading for a little more time, pleading to stay together, pleading for child visitation, pleading for her to try come living here, pleading for understanding, pleading to keep the house. Swaggering men in muddy boots in every bar and cafe ordering the fracker's feast and telling the waitress she had better bring the extra salsa this time. Nervous cops in cafes looking straight ahead. Private jets streaming over the city in their final approach. Miniature makeshift RV parks with hookups on every farm and ranch. Trash in the streets, trash in the borrow ditch, trash piled up next to all the dumpsters, trash spilling out of every barrel and wastebasket, filthy public restrooms, head-ons 4 a week on the region's 2-lane roads, because some alpha male was sure he could pass a line of 20 trucks before the hill. The ubiquity of the F word, the beep, beep, beep of vehicles backing up day and night in every direction, dust and blue exhaust everywhere, sex trafficking rings almost caught, but operating in plain sight in well-known motels, boasting, bombast, boisterousness, bravado, bitching, barking, brawling, bitterness, bankruptcy, blowjobs. In the hallways and the elevators and behind closed doors in the motels, weeping, shouting matches, furniture breaking, domestic violence, raucous partying, slurred monologues of dreams and desperation. Everywhere, a mix of excitement and exhaustion, thousands of men and women looking for the main chance. The volunteer fire department flying to Utah for training in chemical burns. A babble of languages in the schools where waves of new students suddenly appear, others gone overnight, security guards by the doors, mobile classrooms connected only by an extension cord. Angels and demons, 40,000 strong, and you are never quite sure which. That's what an oil boom looks like. So that's one of my favorite passages because when I teach writing, I say, don't be cute. You're not Hemingway, you're not Faulkner, you're not Shakespeare, you're not Milton. Just write sentences. And if you watched Ken Burns' magnificent documentary on Ernest Hemingway recently, Hemingway said, here's what you have to do. Write one true sentence. Just write one true sentence. And when you've done it, write another true sentence. Mm-hmm. And so this is a little bit more stylized because I wanted to speak in a staccato tone with this kind of rapid fire Whitman-esque building up of things to try to give you a sense of exhaustion while you hear it or read it, and yet the kind of utter fascination that comes with something like this. So that's all I have to read. I could read more, but I'd rather talk with all of you.
Right. You know, Clay, that passage made me think that you should try your hand at writing a novel.
I would love to. I actually have one in mind, and I've kind of dabbled with it, and I'll try to see it through.
Cool. I hope you do. I want to thank you for reading for us. I want to remind everybody who's in the webinar, you can type your questions in the Q&A at the bottom of the screen. And if you're watching on the Facebook live stream, we'll have someone checking the comments there. And I just want to ask a question about writing before we get into the book a little bit more. And I wondered what your process was when you set out to write a book like this. And I'd imagine your early drafts relied on a lot of research as well as looking inward towards your own experiences. So how did you approach writing this book?
So a number of things. Number one, I didn't want to write this in an ivory tower or a library or even at my kitchen table. I wanted to get out into it, to camp, to go to the oil boom, to go to sacred places in North Dakota, to visit the world's largest ball of twine, the world's largest sandhill crane, the world's largest buffalo. I wanted to have adventures which would give me a sense of detail, because detail is everything in writing. And if you can nail the detail, it will build you a lot of credibility for the larger things you're trying to get at. And so that's one. And so I made a series of trips, sometimes alone and sometimes with friends, into these places to investigate. And then I came home and wrote right away, because your mind clears pretty quickly of all that detail. So that's one thing. Secondly, here's how I write. I write in the morning, so get up. I try to have a 3, 4, 5 hour period of time. And when I finish, and you have to finish, Steinbeck teaches us that you must discipline yourself not to try to do too much in any day. If you do that, you'll burn out and you'll get exhausted and you'll give up. And so I would write for 3 or 4 hours. And then I would put it aside and do the stuff that you have to do in life, pay your insurance, and take the garbage can out to the curb. I have a friend in North Carolina who does nothing else in life. And so then and then I would print. I'm a terrible paper waster, but I'm old enough to really want to see it in print. And then I would go to a bar or a coffee house in the evening and read over what I'd written and mark it up and make changes in the margins. And then the next morning, the first thing I would do is make those changes on my keypad, because then you're writing. If the worst thing you can do is start in the morning with a blank screen and think, I'm waiting for inspiration. What do I have to say? I must be profound. The best thing you can do is just go fix stuff. Just go fix stuff. Oh, that was a dangling modifier. Oh, that was a noun verb disagreement. That was an awkward sentence. Or look stuff up, how many acre feet in Lake Sakakawea? What's the highest point in North Dakota? How many Native Americans live here now? And then once you do that as the first thing in the morning for 30 or 40 minutes, you're moving, your mind is in, and now you can write. So that's my process. And then I had to decide, well, what's in this book? It's a book about North Dakota, but it really isn't about North Dakota, but North Dakota's the lens. So how can I make it more universal than just that? But at the same time, I wanted this to be, and this, you have to dream, Michael, you don't necessarily achieve it. But my goal was to make this the most important book written about North Dakota in my lifetime. Now that's easier than it would be in California or Virginia, because, there aren't that many people trying to do this, but I wanted it to be a book that if I died tonight after our talk here, that I would have gone to my grave thinking I said what I wanted to say about something of enormous importance to me. And I would be sorry if I died without saying the things that I wanted to say. And so I would my dream for this book is that it creates a statewide conversation, that it's adopted. It's sort of a Norfolk reads kind of thing, and everybody reads and we have meetings and so on, because it's meant to be an analysis of who we are, how we got here, and where we're headed. And the working title of the book was So Who Are We Now? I knew that wasn't going to be the title, but that was my thinking. So who are we now? We knew who we were. We were kind of a clunky family farm state, minded our own business. No one cared about us. We were just this little isolated marginal place, kind of clunky, backward in some ways, but beautiful in really important ways. And now that's all ending because of robotic agriculture and industrial gigantism and new waves of sort of post-agrarian prosperity. And so the question is, if that's who we were, who are we now? And then there's a second question that you would never have to ask in the state of Virginia. It's, why would any rational person live here? You know, why would any rational person live in North Dakota? I'm sure that almost everyone who's watching us would think, yeah, okay, but why would anyone want to live in North Dakota? It's long, 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 raw, cold winters, low amenities. I live in towns where Applebee's is the finest dining. There's no boutique theater here. You know, this is a pretty basic, on the Maslow scale of life, this is pretty close to the bone. So I wanted to explore that. And so those are the questions. And so then I had to decide, well, what are the chapters? You know, and I wanted to be funny. You have to have humor if you're going to write about serious things, or you should. And I wanted to be whimsical, and I wanted to be wry, and I wanted to be ironic, and I wanted at times to be satirical, but I also wanted this to be overall a love song to the Great Plains. And so that was my strategy. And then I had to eliminate about 25,000 words, and it killed me.
Yeah, it always does.
It always kills. And of course, I think, you know, I think they were cutting bone. I think they were cutting the heart out of the book. My editors, their view was we should have cut 3 times that, you know. So that's the constant dilemma.
I love what you said about the mourning process when you would go back into it the next day. I think a lot of writers feel like that blank screen is a terrifying place. And I think I do that too. I always look back at what I wrote the previous day and give it a pass and see if I can fix something. Because sometimes, and I like that you also read it later in the afternoon, because oftentimes I don't really know what I said until I read it the first time.
Absolutely. You know, Horace, the Roman poet, said, when you write a poem, put it in a drawer for 9 years. We don't need to wait 9 years, but if I write something today and push send, I will regret it tomorrow. If I sleep on it, or take a long walk, or even stop to have a meal and come back to it, I'll see glaring problems that I never saw when I first wrote it. And I'll think, oh, that could be made so much better. That I could, this is a different turn of phrase. And so it's not revision so much as processing in your soul, because your soul continues to work the book. Absolutely. While you're doing other things. And then when you come back, you realize that was a nice draft, but it's not nearly ready. Here are some things I can do with that.
I think a lot of writers forget that 95% of writing is revision of what they've written. And it's the most powerful tool, because the first draft comes from our unconscious, or our soul, as you said. And really it's that conscious time when we can really focus on it, that we take control of what we wrote, and we can really fashion it how we want.
I always remember what Woody Allen said, and I love his early essays. And he said in one of his essays, he said, I gave my girlfriend my dissertation on ultimate reality. She said it read like Airport 1975. And so you have to be prepared that you think, oh, I'm being profound, or I really nailed it. But we are so in the weeds in our own way of seeing that we forget that we have to connect the dots for the other person. It's the detail, it's the connecting sentence, it's the frame. You have to bring the other person into the story or into the essay, and you often think that they will get it when they can't, because you haven't given them enough clues. And so a lot of this is when I finish a draft, and not the whole book, say a draft of a chapter, then I take a week off to do something completely different, catch up on the things that I should have been doing. And then I go back and I think, I'm going to read this as if I were the reader, not the writer. Mm-hmm. And then as the reader, I think, what's the world's largest ball of twine? You know, what's a butte? What's fracking? You know, and so then you realize, I have to write this because there will actually be others reading it. It's not just a pure act of narcissism. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Clay, we have a lot of great questions that are coming up, and a couple of them are comments, and I'd like to read some of the comments. An anonymous attendee, and also Joanne Bach, who is a dear friend of yours,
our close friend,
yeah,
Robbie,
have mentioned that they think that your mother would love this book, and they were wondering if you thought that would be true.
I did say in the acknowledgments, when you at the end you write your acknowledgments. I'd like to thank the Academy. You know, I'd like to thank my writing teacher in 6th grade. But in the acknowledgments, I said, I think my mother would like this book because so one of the points I make, and get to the philosophy of the book, as you know, in the first chapter on spirit of place, I say there are two types of North Dakotans. There are accidental North Dakotans and there are naturalized North Dakotans. And an accidental North Dakotan is just someone who happens to live here. They could live anywhere and it doesn't much matter. They go to Target and they go to Walmart and they go to Costco and they eat at Pizza Hut and they watch the same television that everyone else watches. And most Americans are now kind of accidental Americans and accidental Virginians or Nevadans or whatever. The naturalized ones are the ones who absorb something about place. And I was fortunate. My mentor was a journalist and a writer, brilliant man, Michael Jacobs of the Grand Forks Herald in North Dakota, back then the Dickinson Press. He taught me how to write. I've never achieved that his full praise, I must admit. And he changed me from an accidental North Dakotan to a naturalized one. And then my parents were kind of having some trouble in the middle of their marriage, and my mother on a whim applied for a grant to write a kind of a slide tape multimedia program on the cowboys and ranchers of North Dakota. And this was like me saying I'm going to be an Olympic gymnast. And she got this grant, and then we had to do it. And she made me drive. My father made me chaperone. And so I took her around for 2 summers, and I made her a naturalized North Dakotan. So she would like this book because she's in it in many respects, and also that we shared this moment of when you really learn the feel, the energies, the dynamism, the soul of a place. And we shared that camping out, meeting these ranchers and cowboys. And I think this would bring her back to one of the great moments of her life. And I'm sorry she's not here, but she would also say, really, 400 pages? Couldn't you have said it in 200?
She'd be your editor.
Oh yeah, she'd be like my worst severe critic.
Aren't they always?
Yeah.
Clay, Steve Easton has a question. I guess he had an advanced copy and really enjoyed it. Enjoyed learning about the fun places in our state. He's, I guess, in North Dakota with you that he didn't know about previously, especially Medicine Rock and the mosque in Ross. He was wondering if there are any other mostly unknown, interesting places that you were not able to fit into the book that he needs to try to add to his North Dakota bucket list.
Yes, and Stephen Easton's the president of Dickinson State University. He's a superb man. He's directing. This is a hard time for higher ed on the Great Plains because the taxpayers are sort of restive about higher ed, and Dickinson State has had its own series of issues. But we have this great Theodore Roosevelt Center. We're digitizing all of Roosevelt's papers, and I've worked under 4 presidents. He's far and away the one most deeply committed to our success, and he's a truly gifted college president and leader and a friend of mine. And I'm surprised that we can be friends because I answer to him, and he has 1,000 things going on that have nothing to do with my little concerns. So yes, and I want to take him to these places. There are ice caves in the Badlands, if you can imagine it, where the ice is there year-round. So we're that close to the glacial period of the Wisconsin Ice Age. There's Sitting Bull's cabin, which is just inside South Dakota on the Grand River. The cabin is gone, but it's where Sitting Bull was assassinated on December 15th, 1890. It's a place of deep, deep spiritual power. I go there once or twice a year, and I'm always just amazed by the strength of that place. There are places west of the Killdeer Mountains, which are really just buttes, where the Badlands are so deep you could get lost and never come out. They're so beautiful. And down, I don't think that Stephen Easton has been to the place near Pretty Butte, just north of Marmarth, which is where my mother's ashes are strewn, and where mine will someday be strewn if I can't get eaten by that coyote. And there are many, many more. I would love, this probably can't happen because President Easton has a real job. But if he gave me 4 days and we could just tool around, my happiest experiences are a loopy auto trip with no destination, and especially like a willing companion who old enough to have a beer at the end of the day, who's open to, because Michael, you have to be open to the improbable. These are not the Grand Tetons. We are not Crater Lake. We are not Yosemite. We are not Yellowstone. This is subtle. And most people coming through North Dakota say it's flat, it's dull, it's bland, it's nothing going on. You have to grow eyes to see its subtle magnificence. And when you do, man, does it pop. And I would love to take him to all these places. And I couldn't write about all of them in the book, but the one that he's talking about is Medicine Rock. And it's this outcropping of sandstone southwest of Bismarck. And I first discovered it about 15 years ago. It's in the middle of a ranch, of a series of ranches, and it's all private property. And there's this little tiny acreage, which is fenced in by the State Historical Society. And it was a kind of an oracle at Delphi. Natives from all over the Great Plains came there to consult the Manitou or the Great Spirit, the Wakan. And they would fast and pray and dance, and they would then they would ask, should we go to war with the Cheyenne? Should we hunt buffalo this fall or wait till spring? Should I marry the girl from the other clan? And then they would sleep and fast, and then the next day they'd come back to this rock, and it would have incised the answer. And they would take the answer, they draw it maybe on an antelope skin and take it to the shaman and say, what did the medicine rock tell me? The shaman would say, don't marry her. Whatever you do, don't marry her. She's not good for you. Or, yes, go to war, but go to war tomorrow. And so and I go there, and nobody knows about this. The state doesn't really want you going there because there's no protection there. It could be vandalized. And then every time I go, Michael, there are little medicine prayer bundles tied all over that chain link fence. Natives come from all over, and they tie these little tobacco medicine bundles on strings like a rosary. I pray for my friend Michael, and I pray for my friend Stephen Easton. I pray for my friend Sharon Kilzer, and I pray for my child, and I pray for rain, or I pray for a deep life. And then you leave with this intentionality. You leave that rosary there, and then they slowly rot. When I go there, I just think, how can it be that there's a place that it's not on the internet, it's not advertised, there's no commercial marketing, it's in the middle of nowhere, and yet people come from all over because there's some knowledge that Native peoples have, some network that you and I are completely unable to see or hear. And so that's a magical place in North Dakota. And there are probably 25 that I would love to show President Easton. But then you know what? He'd have to resign as president. He'd become a North Dakota writer.
Maybe a sabbatical, and I could come visit too. We could go all around.
You come, I'll take you too. He'd love to meet you.
I would love to do that. We have a question from Frances Ward. She asks, in your chapter on the language of the Cottonwoods, do you write about the sacred properties of the trees and how they are still used in Native American ceremony?
The cottonwood is not particularly much used. It's not great lumber. It's soft and porous, and it burns quickly, and so it's not ideal for building. It warps, and it's not ideal for burning. That's why there are still cottonwoods, because white people haven't figured out a way to extract value out of them. So I love that about them. And North Dakota is the most treeless of states. Virginia has a lot of trees, but Maine has more trees than any other state. North Dakota has the fewest trees of any state in the country. Nebraska is second. And most of the trees in North Dakota were planted by white people, shelter belts and the trees around the homestead and so on, lilac, Russian olive, and so on. So the last chapter is called The Language of Cottonwoods. And the question is, do trees have souls? Do trees talk? Do trees have ways of communicating? And of course, I think they do. I'm not quite sure how it works. It's not like whales and dolphins and bees, but there's something going on there. Because one tree, when trees get too close together, two cottonwoods, they'll grow up, and then they'll refuse to encroach on each other's canopy. They'll each restrain their canopy so that they come like that close together, but one doesn't try to shadow out the other. It's amazing. A tree root will hit an obstruction, and then it'll slowly find a way around and continue its journey. So there's got to be some soulfulness there if we only had the eyes to see it. And so the last chapter is about the life and death of a cottonwood, its birth. Like 99.999% of all cottonwood seeds die. It takes just like the perfect storm of kind of moist ground, but not too moist for them to grow. And then you watch it, and there's this little copse of trees that I'll be glad to take Stephen Easton to, or others. It's north of the Elkhorn Ranch. And these are ancient cottonwoods that have been cut off. The river moved somewhere else, and they've now reached their death age. They're probably 150 years old, the oldest trees probably in the state. I discovered them by accident, and one is dying. And as they die, Michael, they kind of fall down, they lose a limb. It's like you need a knee replacement, you need a hip replacement, you need
Right.
they fall down. And then when they finally do collapse in the big wind or when lightning hits them, then little creatures come and eat them. I mean, tiny little bugs, and every year they get more diminished. You see these little boreholes all over, and then 25 years later, the tree is gone. The tree has been reabsorbed into nature, and it's now growing other things. It's growing grass. And so I end the book by saying, and this is, I guess, a really important point to me, why do we humans deny ourselves the chance to give back to the earth? When we die, we're filled with formaldehyde, we're put in hermetically sealed caskets, we're put in vaults. No wonder the planet is dying. No wonder we've screwed this up so badly, because we have defined ourselves as other from the rest of nature.
Right.
And we're not other from the rest of nature. We are of nature. And if we were cool with death and rebirth and regeneration and recycling in the most profound way, we would want to die like that cottonwood. So when I joke that I want to die out in the badlands, I mean it. If I could plan my death, I would just die, maybe struck by lightning, maybe just die. And then I'd be found 18 months later, and there would be like a little belt buckle, and they'd say, "Oh yeah, that was that idiot," But to be reabsorbed, to be eaten by a badger, to be eaten by a mountain lion, for me, that would be like the ultimate way to really be back in the world, and not pretending, as we all do, that humans exist on top of the world, and we don't have to participate in it.
Mm-hmm. Carol Harry had a similar question, but part of her question we didn't get to, and that is, how did you get from the working title to the title you chose at the end, when it was published?
Because I love the idea of the language of Cottonwoods. I just love the notion that the I thou, I guess, I've been talking about this here, but the I thou split, that I am a unique individual human character and entity, and then there is the world. That is, I think, a fundamentally flawed notion. And so I wanted to collapse that in these stories. I wanted to be out in the windstorm. I wanted to love the blizzard. I wanted to enjoy the isolation and the wind. We're the fourth windiest place in North America. And so I've loved that phrase for a long time. And I thought that's the way to end the book. And I didn't want this to be like essays on the future of North Dakota, because it's not that stern. It's not that analytical. It's not a socio-economic tract. It's not even a political argument. And so I wanted it to be lyrical, and that's a lyrical title. And I wanted to emphasize the magnificence of the cottonwood, which nobody would. It's not a redwood. It's not a sequoia. It's not even an aspen. It's kind of a basic tree. But in October, when the leaves turn like 8 times more beautiful than that, wow, it is one of the great experiences. I go out and I lie under a cottonwood, just take the day off. There's a chapter on this in the book, and if you, I know this sounds a little crazy, but if you just listen, the breeze will come, Michael, and it'll touch off the leaves over here, and they'll just dance a little bit, and then it'll quiet down, slowly quiet down. And then another breeze, and this one, it'll move over here, and then it'll be really crazy here, but this will be still. And then at some points, the whole tree is just going nuts, and then it calms down and it almost ends. But even when it's dead calm, you see the little tiny little flutter, and then it picks up, and you watch this crescendo. It's like watching a symphony. And if you just drink it in, you realize what infinite variety there is, that this is a symphony better than the best symphonies I've heard of the London Philharmonic, because it's the symphony of nature. And the cottonwood has some miraculous physics that allow the breeze to do this. And you get mesmerized by it. And then I think, this is why I live here.
Mm-hmm.
This is why I live here. It's not because of access to the Beltway. It's not because of the great cuisine. It's certainly not because of the politics, which are increasingly icky, kind of red state icky, kind of Sean Hannity's America. I live here for the Little Missouri River, for the improbability of living in North Dakota, for the kinds of friendships that can occur in a stark place. The Nebraska novelist Wright Morris said, "In dry places, men begin to dream. where the rivers run sand, something in the soul of man begins to flow. And that for me has been kind of a motto through life. So so the title was something that I was set on, and my editors were like, yeah, we might want to tweak that a little. But you can't insist, your publisher has an enormous power. But my editors wanted me to maybe make it more straightforward what my argument was. But no, I want people to read this book for a variety of reasons. In my own little way, it's sort of my Walden, at a very low level of that, of course. And it's certainly an argument that North Dakota is way, 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 way more interesting than most people think.
Clay, we have a couple questions that came in the chat, and Valerie Martin is wondering, sort of a two-part question. Knowing North Dakota's historic soul and character, what's its greatest threat today? And the second part of her question is, what do you think Teddy Roosevelt would say about today's North Dakota?
I know and really admire Valerie. She's a North Dakotan. She's an expat. Almost we grow young people to share with the world. Almost nobody gets to stay, and the best. Some of the best leave because they want more. They just want more, and North Dakota's trying to provide it, but it can't always. And there's an intolerance. There's a xenophobia here, which I find sad, I guess. What's the biggest threat to North Dakota? There are two threats. One is that I don't think I'm exaggerating, our energy development motto is essentially Sarah Palin's, drill, baby, drill. It's not drill carefully, or let's tiptoe around some really important places, or do we have to drill all of it at once? It's basically let her rip. There's money to be had. We can extract money from this land. And if we have to crack some eggs and roll over some beautiful places, by Godfrey, we're going to do it. And that spirit comes from a certain kind of PTSD that occurred during the 1980s, I think, when there was drought and an economic collapse, and horrible outmigration and farm bankruptcy. But that's not a healthy or a sustainable ethos. And so if we continue that idea that everything is fungible, that everything can be turned into profit, and that's the purpose of North Dakota, that's been in our DNA for a long time, but not in this virulent form. And so that breaks my heart. The other thing is, and I don't know how to even address this, Michael, but red America, North Dakota's red, Virginia's blue or purple or somewhere in between, depending on where you are. Red America is going to have to get over its grievance culture. This idea, this anger, and we all have been puzzling this, whether you're a Trump voter or a Trump hater. We've all been puzzling for the past 5 years on what's the grievance, what's the deep rage, what's the rage that fuels all of this, the anger, the grievance, the wrath, the rage, the mean-spiritedness. And this is taking over rural America. And not just rural America, but primarily rural America. And I can't for the life of me see why, because I drive around North Dakota. We're more prosperous than we have ever been in the whole history of the state. The farms look great. There are new pickups and cars. There are new houses being built. The lawns are mowed. Harold Macmillan said to the British people in 1957, "You've never had it so good." And that's my view to the people of North Dakota. If you could choose any time in the history of North Dakota to live here in terms of success and prosperity, this has to be that time. And so you think, what's at stake here? And all this, anger all the time, and wanting to find people to blame for everything, and feeling that someone somewhere is going to take your gun away, and someone somewhere is going to take your private property away, and that the Democrats are going to socialize and destroy the country, or that the Republicans are. That spirit is unhealthy. It's toxic. I think it runs pretty shallow. I think it's a software that we're running. It's not really deep, because the North Dakota people are wonderful, caring, neighborly, God-fearing, law-abiding, decent people. But on the surface, they have bought this madness, from Rush and Sean and their ilk, and Tucker Carlson. Just the anger. And there's, of course, righteousness on the left too, don't get me wrong. And so we have to recover from that, because we're better than that. and life is better than that. And those things don't run very deep into the heart of humankind or even into our daily lives. And so those two things really worry me. And then I'll say one more, and this is, I almost hesitate to say this, but North Dakota is one of the most homogenous populations. You know, we have a very small number of African Americans. We have Native Americans. They represent 5 or 6% of the population, but we're overwhelmingly white Northern European. Norway, Sweden, England, Germany, Ukraine, Germans in Russia, Bohemians. We could become a sanctuary for white supremacy. That's to overstate it, but we have to open our hearts to welcome a new type of North Dakotan, to diversify who we are and bring fresh blood. And I'm afraid that people are going to start to, we are seeing all these books about how people are gravitating to their political center. People in California want to be in Texas. Liberals in Texas want to go to California. I'm afraid that North Dakota might attract people who want to live in a homogenous, white, simple, beer drinking, candle, Roman candle on the 4th of July kind of America. And so I hope that doesn't happen. And I think the winters are so rough that maybe it won't. But I think we should embrace the 21st century. If you go to New York, within 5 days, you've come to terms with the whole crazy diversity of New York. We're provincial out here. And when 9/11 happened, we thought, why do they hate us? Because we're so far from everything. We can't imagine that anyone could possibly want to damage us because we're just so normal. We're all members of the Kiwanis Club, and we meet at the golf course, and we yield to each other at the traffic stops, and we're so decent and provincial that we think this is what life should be. But of course, that's not what life is anymore.
Right. Clay, we're running a little bit short on time, but I was wondering if we could go maybe 5 minutes late, just to get to some questions.
As long as you want, as far as I'm concerned, but I can outlast everyone who's watching. But sure I love this. Thank you.
This is fun. I'll tell you maybe some rapid fire questions.
Let's do rapid fire.
Okay. So Patrick Murphy wants to know, what's the first thing or place a new visitor to North Dakota should experience? What's the most important thing?
I would say get out into the heart of the center of the state. Don't go to the Badlands, because the Badlands are sort of North Dakota's Montana. Go into the center of the rolling hill country, the prairie grasses and the pothole country, and just get on a little county blacktop road, kind of at first stage of paving, and just stop the car somewhere and just walk. And you'll be under this immense sky, and the rolling prairie, and the sense of being all alone in the universe. It reduces us to like Lilliputian size, and yet you feel monstrously alive out there. So if anyone wants to come, I can give you a little like cheat sheet on places to go. But if you go to the Badlands first, you get the wrong impression, because that's North Dakota's Montana. That's not really what the state is like.
And I should mention that you also offer tours, some that take place in North Dakota, where you give sort of a very personal look at some of the best places to be. Robin Cowherd has a complimentary section of his question. He's very excited about being here, but his question is, how do you prioritize everything that you do?
Oh, that's rough. Today I taught a class at a local Catholic university on the Great Plains, and I had 3 or 4 other things. I'm working on this immense Edward S. Curtis exhibit for our big annual symposium at Dickinson State University on Roosevelt, September 23rd, 24th, and 25th. People should come. We do an annual public humanities symposium on Roosevelt. This year, we're doing it, among other things, on an exhibit involving Edward S. Curtis and Theodore Roosevelt. And I write books, and I teach online courses, and I do these cultural tours, and I perform around the country, and write for governing.com, and on and on and on. And I sometimes think, boy, that's dilettantish. It may be a high level of dilettantism, but it's dilettantism, and it's exhausting, because I have to spin all these different plates. So I'm spinning some Theodore Roosevelt plates, getting ready for that. And I'm writing this book and spinning that plate. And then it's a cultural tour for Lewis and Clark. And I'm going down the Salmon on a whitewater trip soon. And so I'm spinning all these plates. If you've ever seen a plate spinner, it's one of my favorite circus acts. And then I'm thinking and the phone rings and someone says, do you want to do this? And I say, of course. And so I'm spinning that plate too. And it's exhausting. But you know what? No heavy lifting. There's no hay bales. I'm not pounding a hammer in a 20-degree below zero day on a construction site. And who wouldn't want this life? I get to read for a living. I get to talk for a living. I get to write for a living. I've had a certain amount of influence through the Jefferson Hour and other things that I do. Yeah, my life is exhausting, and there's a reason why I live alone, because no rational person would want to be part of this. But it is absolutely thrilling. I mean, it's just absolutely thrilling to have the access that I do to books. If I decide I want to give a weekend retreat on Tolstoy, I can do it. If I decide I want to give a 4-day retreat on Jack Kerouac, I can do it. If I want to give a 4-day retreat on the great dam building era of the mid 20th century, I can do it. And so I get to
perform Hamlet.
I performed Hamlet. Yes. I got to be Hamlet. My life's dream was to be Hamlet. Yep. And thanks to a good friend of ours, Paul Lassico, there at the TTC Roper Theater, he said, and this was kind of mean, Michael, but he said, yeah, I'll do it, but you're really in the King Lear phase of your life, honey, which I took personally. But with pancake makeup, I performed as Hamlet, and it was absolutely thrilling. You know,
it was a wonderful night.
And then I got to do, I cut a comedy album in Norfolk, and I got to tell my comedy shtick. And so far I've sold, I think, 4 CDs. And so it's been a wild success.
I think your artist, Katrina Case, thanks you for trusting her paintbrush, and then asks, in what ways can I and each one of us make a positive impact on the future of North Dakota? How can she use her talents to raise awareness?
Oh man, is she doing it. You know, yeah. She is a lovely, lovely human being. She's sort of a muse for me, to use a word close to your own heart, Michael. I met her. We've probably been together for a total elapsed time of an hour and 12 minutes. And I saw something in her. She has a story, but she came to North Dakota as a kind of a refuge, living with an uncle who's a rancher, is this really gifted painter, somehow has become a naturalized North Dakotan. I don't ever see her, but we sort of text back and forth. And she is the very spirit of what we need. Here's somebody who did choose to move to North Dakota, and she has artistic talent. And David Borlaug, who is a good friend of mine and has something called the Dakota Gallery, the Capitol Gallery in Bismarck and out in Medora, saw her work, is featuring it. She's getting commissions. If she would just surrender to me, I would have her paint 10 paintings a month for me, because I now want to do stuff on Walden, and I want to do stuff on Jack Kerouac and Lewis and Clark, and everything I ask her to do, she does, and does splendidly. So she's doing it. But she also teaches art up in this little village called Anamoose, which is a very funky village up near Minot. And so she's spreading the good news, and that's all one can do. But I hope that people say, hey, I want to know who that artist was. And I hope that she does more of my books, and I hope she does all the work that she dreams of doing, because she's authentic, and her art has an integrity to it that, you know, she gave me everything I wanted in this cover, and boy, you can't ask for that.
We have a couple questions from Karen Kaylee Shore, but I think I'll ask the second question, and that is, are there libraries or archival collections that you tapped and researched for your book, and what were they?
One of them is that internet.
Right.
Man, does the internet help? You know, when I write, here's another little writing tip. When I write, it'll be like, the Little Missouri River has X cubic feet per second, because it starts at X in Wyoming and flows through X states. Its mouth is near X, North Dakota, and the last time it flooded was in X. And then every hour or so I take a break, and in 3 minutes I look all this stuff up and put it in. If you stop every time to look stuff up, it'll really slow you down. But if you just write X and then use your breaks when your brain is dead, use the internet. I also did some original research for the book, but most of it is experiential, Michael. It's getting out there and listening to the wind and feeling the grass and lying out. You go out and lie on top of a butte, or I actually sit down in the Little Missouri River and just bask. It's only 6 inches deep, and read for an hour or two and listen to the coyotes at dusk. A lot of it is that. And then when I would go to a place like the first mosque in America, or one of the first mosques, there's a debate about that. I called the guy. It's a tiny little replacement mosque, so it's really a commemorative one at Ross, North Dakota, and it has a keypad, and I wanted to get in it. So I called the guy who's the caretaker in this town, and he answered the phone, and he said, "I don't have long to talk. I'm heading to the doctor in Minot." And I said, "Oh, sometime if I'm up there, I'd love to get in this mosque to see what's inside." And he said, "Yeah, wait a minute." And he left and he came back and said, "Oh, the heck with it. I'll just give you the key code." That's North Dakota. So I got in, and it has beautiful things inside. And then I was able to use that. I take photographs of everything, and then I bring those photographs back and use them as a basis for research. And then when I have real questions, like how many bison are alive in North Dakota today, or how many Native Americans in North Dakota are doctors, I can either look that up, or I can find a foundation or a university or a college or a tribal entity, and you call them. So most of it is not reading for this book. It's a lifetime of reading that went into it, but the actual research is mostly on the ground.
Right. I know we're a little bit over, but just a couple just comments that Gene Kohlberg just wanted you to know that's beautiful. And Philip Klum wanted to know, in the book, do you write about leaving North Dakota and coming back, and why you did that?
I did that in another book called Message on the Wind, one of my first books, and it was about that. But no, I didn't want to put much of me in this book.
Right.
I wanted to be the author. I wanted people to feel my perspective in my presence, but I didn't want to say, and I did this and I did that. And so that passage that I read about the camping was sort of unusual for the book. I tried to keep myself out of it as much as possible. And so it's a discipline, but I didn't want to talk about my life story. I wanted to talk about this place. And here, the rap on me, as President Easton or Valerie Martin will know, is that they'll say, well, here's an elitist who is highly educated and is no longer really a North Dakotan. And, how dare he pretend to analyze this place? Because that's the easiest way to avoid the actual conversation. And I don't care what people think. I do, but I don't pretend that I can control that. But I think I have a right to ask the questions. And if this can create a dialogue, who are we? How did we get here? Where are we headed? What happens in a post-agrarian North Dakota? Why would anyone live here if you can live in Hawaii or Santa Fe, or even for that matter, Rapid City, South Dakota? So these questions have to be answered, or at least asked, because here's the deal, and I'll be quick about it. Farming is changing, revolutionary. The first fully robotic farm is being built near Fargo, North Dakota. There will be farms that can be operated by a joystick in Puerto Rico or Honolulu, and a farmer might own his farm, but it'll have 200,000 acres. That's one thing. And secondly, our towns are hollowing out at the same time that the carbon world is changing. So we are now utterly dependent upon carbon. So it's the Saudi Arabia addiction. That's our main source of revenue now. We all know that carbon's going to diminish because the world is moving away from gross carbons, coal certainly, even oil and natural gas. And so when that happens, if I understand the economics of scarcity, that means the price of a barrel of oil will diminish and maybe plummet. You can't frack oil, and fracking, by the way, is safe here on the whole. You can't frack oil for less than $50 or $55 a barrel. It's currently at 70, but if you get down to $35 a barrel, which could easily happen, that's the end of the carbon industry in North Dakota. And so, GM has said there will be no internal combustion cars by 2035. The handwriting is on the wall. And so we have to begin to think beyond that. And that's why the work at Dickinson State University or our other 10 public universities is so important. We need to be envisioning a post-agrarian, post-carbon future. And that's going to take enormous creativity. And I don't see it, frankly, yet in the state legislature.
You know, if you wouldn't mind, I kind of I wrote a lot of questions for myself just in case the audience didn't have any, and they had such wonderful questions. But there's one thing that hasn't been brought up, and something struck me in the book, something you bring up. I'd like you to just sort of talk about what it is and what it means to you, and that is participatory consciousness.
Right. So there's a book I recommend by Morris Berman called The Reenchantment of the World. Morris Berman, Berman, The Reenchantment of the World. And the argument is that for most of human history, we have had participatory consciousness. And Native Americans are a good example, Michael. So Sitting Bull talked to meadowlarks. The great Hunkpapa Lakota Sitting Bull would be out either hiking or fasting or praying, and suddenly meadowlarks would tell him what to do. And he'd hear them and he'd talk with them. And there would be this dialogue. And the Native Americans of the plains believe that trees have consciousness, and buffalo certainly have consciousness, and soul, spiritual life, and that everything does. And that if we would just open our antenna to listen, the world's ready to talk, and we can discern things from a badger, from a mosquito, from a bat, from a coyote, and that this is essential to living in a sustainable way on the earth. And so in the 17th century, which is where my actual expertise is, and John Donne and John Milton and the scientific revolution moving towards the Enlightenment, that's what I studied during my time at Oxford and the University of Minnesota. That cut us off. That cut participatory consciousness and said humans are unique. We're semi-angelic. The rest of the world is there as a commodity. Francis Bacon said we should fret the world to build profit and usefulness for ourselves. And so we shoved out that, and when someone has a dream today, we discount it. If somebody has an intuition today, we discount it. If I'd called you a couple of hours ago and said, I had a dream that said I shouldn't do this tonight, you would have said, "Are you nuts? We've got people waiting." But the Native Americans would take that seriously and say, we need to think about that dream.
Right.
They still have some of this participatory consciousness, and it's beautiful. It slows things down a little at times. That is true. But so we've lost that. And Morris Berman in The Reenchantment of the World says, until we regain that and break down this I-thou barrier, which makes us so arrogant. We can put a man on the moon. We just landed a magnificent probe on Mars. That's a triumph of Newtonian mechanics. We produced a vaccine in 9 months, unprecedented in human history.
Absolutely.
We have telecommunications. A year and a half ago, I didn't know what Zoom was. Now it's central to my existence, and look how great it is. You and I, you couldn't have afforded to fly me out to Norfolk. It'd be silly, but now we can do this. And so our non-participatory consciousness has been extremely useful for what it allows. But shall we put Auschwitz in this story? Using German high chemical systems and factories to kill millions of people. How about Hiroshima and Nagasaki? I have a chapter on the nuclear North Dakota. We still have 150 ICBM missiles here. This consciousness that we have is a nearly miraculous thing. We obliterated smallpox and polio. If the anti-vaccine people would get on board, we could obliterate almost everything.
Right.
But there's a cost to this. By not granting agency to that wolf or that pronghorn antelope or that grizzly bear or that, frankly, Native American, we have rolled over the world ruthlessly. And it shows in our souls. That's why we watch sitcoms. Truly, America is the nation of sitcoms and reality TV, and look what it brought us. Because we have rolled over the world, we have shallowed out our souls, and they're hungry for more, for the authentic. And if you come to North Dakota, I'll take you there. But you don't have to come there. There's something 8 miles from Norfolk where you could go and cut yourself off from the lifeline of reality television and whatever else is your addiction. Diet Coke for me. And you could, and if you breathe out there, your soul will open, and amazing things will happen. And so I don't think we're going to get back to participatory consciousness, but we should let a little in, because I think we've seen where this takes us, and it takes us to a cul-de-sac. It takes us to a spiritual cul-de-sac in which the Holocaust is always a real possibility. For example, think Abu Ghraib, think My Lai, think Guantanamo. It still happens in this country. Think of police shootings in Minneapolis or in Florence, Missouri. So we have got to get off this ride a little bit and soften it and open our hearts. And if you go out and lie on the grass, you are sure to get it. And so that's a North Dakota version of it.
And how much more powerful would we be as a people if we combined this great ability to be advanced technologically with being more conscious? That synthesis could create wonderful things, right?
It's like what we're doing at Dickinson State. So, we do great things there. And I also have a connection with several other universities, and I love them. But I'm wondering, and this would be a question for President Easton and for anyone who's in higher ed. So someone who's going to graduate, say in 2025, young woman, young man, in Virginia or in North Dakota or in Hawaii, what do we want that person to know then? Because whatever is factual, they've got. What skills do we want them to have? What flexibility? How can we how can we help them be a complete human being? How can we make sure that they're lifelong learners? How can we make them questers rather than settlers? How can we urge them to challenge their own convictions and to light things up a little at Thanksgiving dinner at their first year of university life? And I think we have to re-empower people. And now that people are borrowing $25,000, $50,000, $75,000, $200,000 to get through college, all they think about is, I've got to service that debt. I'd better get my job doing X. And so that lyricism where you backpack through Europe, or you go work in a kibbutz, or you hitchhike to California and work in the rice fields or in Napa Valley, that's harder and harder and harder, and only the very privileged can now do it. And frankly, the very privileged aren't the people that the future belongs to. And so we're going to have to really rethink all of this, because we want to turn people into Peace Corps volunteers and Vista volunteers and shameless backpackers, so they could go see what's possible in life before settling in the insurance company or the bank, or in my case, performing historical characters.
Well, Clay, I am definitely aware of your time, and we couldn't get to all the questions, nor James and some others who asked. I apologize for not.
If you send them to me, we'll do a special Jefferson hour on this.
Okay,
I'd love to do that.
I'm going to copy and paste them into a little file and send them to you. But there is one question I do want to get to before we go, and it's, I think, maybe the most important question. And Gene Kohlberg asked us, where can I buy the book? Our Barnes & Noble cannot get it yet. I think it just came out. That's probably why.
It came out Tuesday, so it should be able to get it. So go demand it. Meanwhile, your local bookstore, what's the one I love? Prince
Books in Norfolk will be, I'm sure, carrying it.
Now, Prince Books, you and I go there sometimes.
Yeah.
And I was recognized by a barn lover who is not a barn denier there. It's a great little, your independent bookstore is your best bet, but it won't have it yet. So you have to ask for it. But if you don't mind Jeff Bezos and Amazon and BarnesandNoble.com, you can get it. And someone wrote to me today, the editor of Forbes magazine, who's a North Dakotan, wrote me, said he's already 100 pages into the Kindle version. So you can get the ebook anytime you want, if that doesn't offend your sensibilities, as it sort of sometimes does mine. So it's going to be available. And also, if you just send me an email, and I think you could put up my email address, clayjenkinson2010@gmail.com, and just say you want a book, I'll sign one and send it to you, and you can send me a check. We still believe in trust out here in North Dakota, but my goal is to sell 5 million copies, but I'm going to count on about 3,000.
Yeah, well, I have one on order, and you guys sent me one as well, and I actually,
Christmas is coming,
I ordered the hardback. I want to have the hardback for my bookshelf, but
right, exactly. No, I really hope people will get over. My daughter said, "Dad, don't put North Dakota in the title. Do you want to sell this thing or don't you?" I hope people can get over that and realize that, first of all, I love this place. I love this place. I hope that you felt that everywhere in this book, and I also believe that the Great Plains could be a template for the future if we grow up and get our act together and really face some things.
Mm-hmm.
But also, I believe this is my most important work ever. That includes the Jefferson Hour and everything else that I've done. And so I ask people who care about writing or care about me, or the work that I've done, to take a chance on this book. I would love to be able to say this sold 10,000 copies. I wouldn't retire, because that would be about $250 in royalties, but still, I would be absolutely thrilled.
And of course, we should thank John Kohler at Kohler Books for believing in the book as well.
You set that up, my friend. I was at some event for you, and then
the Book Lovers Bash, and our last
these two knuckleheads came up and said, "Hi, we're Beavis and Butthead. We'd love to publish your books." And I was thrilled, because here I am. I did not want to publish this in North Dakota. I wanted this to be a national press. They've been terrific, John Kohler, and he's like the boomerang champion of Virginia Beach or something. But that was terrific, and so that has been a fruitful thing, and you made it possible.
Awesome. I'm happy that worked out, and it was so nice having you at the bash that year too. It was
I'm ready. I'm can.
One of the last big events we had before the pandemic. Actually,
I loved it. I sold 100 books that night that had nothing to do with anything, but people impulse buy if you tell enough jokes.
And we had some free drinks that also helps too.
You know what Hausman said? Malt does more than Milton can to justify God's ways to man.
And didn't you impulse buy the Charles Dickens set you mentioned earlier at the back?
Sure. So I have 4 complete Dickens sets here. The one I bought at your event, and that's the Oxford edition. Right. And then I have this incredible onion skin edition, 2 versions of it actually. And then when I finished the book, I bought this really beautiful 1918 edition.
Oh, very nice.
And then I don't use any of them, Michael. Then I have all my trade books that are just like Penguin and Modern Library, because I wouldn't dare mess with those real books. Just having them over my shoulder,
right,
makes me feel joyful. If I could only have one author on a desert island, and I had a Kindle so I could have the complete works of that author, I would spend the rest of my time with Dickens.
Yeah. Well, Clay, I want to just do a quick closing. And first of all, thank everyone who's here with us tonight in the live stream or in the webinar, and also those who are watching this later on the Facebook Live or recording. Your engagement is really what gives us all hope for the future of our great society, I believe. And I also want to remind everyone to please visit the Muse Writers Center's website, the-muse.org, the-muse.org, to learn more about our classes and events and programs. And you're all welcome to be part of our literary community. And as a reminder to please buy the book. We need to get Clay his $250 of royalties. And you can visit your local bookstore, as Clay mentioned, and ask for it. Or I think the Kohler Books website would probably also have information on who has it. And finally, Clay, I just want to thank you, first of all, for being my friend, but not just for being here tonight and reading to us and answering all of our questions, but for writing this book and reminding us that we all need this kind of discourse in our civic lives. I think that's so important.
Michael, I love you, and I love what you do. And as you know, I got to give teach a class when I was there last, and those students, there were like 9 or 10 of them, and we all said what we were going to finish within the next year and a half. I just want to say to them, hey, I did mine, honey. I want all of you to finish those books that you're working on, the poems, the novels, the memoirs, because it really is, it's what Hemingway said. You want to write a book, just sit in front of a typewriter and sweat blood through your temples for 8 hours a day. Books are written by perseverance.
That's right.
Books are written by a refusal to give up.
Well, thank you, Clay, and thank you everyone for joining us tonight. We very much appreciate you being here. And thank you, Sean, for producing on the back end. And thank you, Beth, for setting us all up. So it's wonderful again to see you, my friend. And we will talk again soon.
We will see you soon. I'm in my characteristic Oxford cloth shirt and you're in your polo shirt.
That's right.
Things never change. See you all. Thank you.
See you all later. Thank you so much for being here.